Drop and Give Me 20 is brought to you by Germono Advertising Company. Drop and Give Me 20 is the podcast for military entrepreneurs. Each episode is around 20 minutes long, giving entrepreneurs a glimpse into the life of other successful military entrepreneurs, learning from their obstacles and gaining insight and inspiration. Podcast episodes focus on the stories, challenges, and wins military entrepreneurs have faced in their businesses. I am your host, Lindsay Germono, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Drop and Give Me 20. I am your host, Lindsay Germono, and I am joined with my co-host, Claire Yanta O'Mahony. We have two very special guests today. A very good friend of mine, Lauren Hope. Lauren is the owner of, she actually is the owner of Hope Design Ltd, and she also founded the ShopMilitary Movement. Rachel Brenke, if you are anywhere online, you would have heard of her. She is a phenomenal lawyer. She does a lot with entrepreneurs, and she does a lot with the military community space. So I'm very honored to have her on today for the podcast. So good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
For those that are listening, we kind of do a little bit of warm up before we get into the conversation today, but I kind of explained to them, the theme of this year, of this year, who knows what the heck the theme of 2020 is.
Oh my gosh.
Bad theme, guys. Let's go back to the drawing board on that for 2021.
Right.
But the theme for this year is really this roundtable discussion with other military entrepreneurs. And Claire, I am going to throw the ball to you because you were actually the one who came up with this whole concept for this season. So talk to our guests and our listeners a little bit about what to expect in this episode.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for tuning in. We are so lucky to have Lauren and Rachel here, and of course, Lindsay. So what really was our hope for this season was to ask, how are you really doing? Like, really, how are you? Rachel's like, what? Did I know that was coming? So we want to get into like the real stuff. Like, how are things going? How's it been? What are your hopes? Just to have this collaborative, like Lindsay said, natural and organic conversation. So again, the genesis of this is the question of how are you doing, really? So I'm going to put that out there. How are you ladies doing, really? Mm-hmm. And whoever wants to speak up first, go ahead and tell us, how are you doing, really?
So in this dumpster fire of 2020,
say,
I'm making it, but not without ruining my dental work and gritting my teeth a whole lot. It's been a journey. I have young kids at home, and it has put an entirely new spin on being an entrepreneur and a parent. It's tough. It's tough, but as a military spouse, I've applied the pivot and Semper Gumby and all the good things, and we're making the best of it. And I think we're going to make it through. So
it's going to be different. I feel like, after whenever this starts to peter out and we start to kind of like resurface, I feel like our whole, everything will change. What I do love is like what you touched on, Lauren, with that military spouse entrepreneur component. And, we all know as a military business owner, whether you're affiliated as an active duty member or military spouse or a veteran, that you are in constant unplanned motion. So you are in constant influx of, you could literally have your orders in hand and then something change. And so don't buy that house yet, or don't move, don't pack up the kids yet. Don't do all that stuff. So I hear you, Lauren, with that. And I'm like, the military spouse stuff it's trained us. We've kind of, grown a little bit of a thick skin. What about you, Rachel? How are you doing really in 2020?
Oh, it's funny. I had just posted right before I got on here on Instagram. I decided to pivot there, and instead of asking my audience how they were feeling, I was sharing what my weaknesses were this week and asking what they've done to go through that. And or just things that I'm struggling with. But actually, right now you're catching me in a decent moment. Ask me in like 2 hours when I'm doing facilitating learning from home stuff. But I actually feel pretty decent about the year. It's actually unfortunate that we started the year before all the pandemic stuff with really traumatic event in our family. And so pandemic is actually giving us an opportunity to reconnect as a family, even with doing like learning from home. We're doing some traveling. So I'm trying to make the best of it. And like you said, Lauren, you're just pivoting. And I didn't even realize till you were saying it that that's what I mentally had done. I think it was just so ingrained from being a, military dependent as a daughter all the way through being as a spouse. And now he's medically retired. But yeah, so I'm doing okay. I mean, obviously it has its moments. And one of the big things that I'm also really learning this year is that you identify the emotions that you're having about the situation and realize that emotions are temporary. So I think it's easy that when you're feeling such overwhelming frustration, whether it's in pandemic or just in really regular life, entrepreneurship, military life, it's easy to be like, oh, this life is so stressful. And it's like, no, just this moment is stressful. You're not going to be stressed the whole day. And it's a lot about intentionality. But I think the military spouses kind of really already have that under their belt. And so, yeah, I mean, we could say military life has prepared us for pandemic.
For those that are listening, Rachel Brenke has a multitude of licenses as an attorney. Rachel, when I was really, when I was looking over your website and everything, I kind of am curious, have you seen an uptick in people wanting to start businesses and, getting the legal backing as, in relationship to the pandemic?
Yeah, what's interesting is this has been my best year of business, and it's kind of nice to see my dividends, the dividends of my hard work. But a lot of it is a combination of my hard work, but also many people taking the same approach, like I just mentioned. They have this opportunity, and I feel like this is something I've talked about and thought about for years, that as military spouses, we don't have a choice but to move and restart our business somewhere, or have to adjust to the spouse or partner being deployed and having to deal with it. A lot of civilians don't have that force, and they're now getting that force to kind of make them pivot and change. And it's exciting for me because oftentimes you have to have that push. So to answer your question, yes, we're seeing a major uptick. I'm especially with that I do a lot of intellectual property, trademark, and copyright work. I'm seeing a lot of brands really getting their legs under themselves and being like, all right, this is serious. On my online business, or even like Lauren, who can work remotely and take it as she goes, I need to protect that brand. And they're being very serious about it. I wish I hadn't taken a pandemic to get this seriousness happening, but it's a good silver lining coming out of it.
Gotcha. Awesome. That's good to hear. First, I need to go back and express my condolences for your loss. Sorry, I tend to. Yes. Claire knows I run like a ferret on a wheel. I'm like,
I love the way Lindsay's mind works.
I'll come back. And then second out, I celebrate your success. The agency on my end, and Claire, I want to hear from you too, has not had a great 2020. Many of my clients either meet me in person, and so it tends to have a very relationship type of feel. So I will be very candid and honest and upfront and say, 2020 hasn't been the best year. I went from having, almost a dozen people working under the agency at one point to less than 5. But in a way, and this is kind of how I think too, sometimes streamlining and limiting and trimming the fat and, kind of coming down helps you reset. And so that was maybe something that was intentional, maybe not, I don't know. And then the pandemic happened. I'm just glad I was able to keep the person that, the folks on payroll that I could. So, when Claire asked me in the beginning of kind of this whole ideation of the season 5, how are you doing? I was like, fine. She was like, but how are you really doing? I was like, oh, you know what? Not good.
The floodgates open, and that's
right. I was like, actually, no, I don't know why I'm saying fine. I don't know.
Yeah, and
because it's a habit.
Exactly, yeah. We're trained to say that, and by being vulnerable and being open about our our successes, our struggles, our failures, the things that are keeping us up at night, that's when we really connect and the good stuff happens. So to answer your question, Lindsay, how I could kind of weigh in, I think this year has been kind of a mix for me. So even before we knew that life was going to be what it is right now, my goal for 2020 after moving out of 2019 was to try to focus more on my business, to work more online, And that's in contrast to my 2019. That's my first full year of living in San Francisco. My husband is separated from the military now and is a civilian or veteran. And so I was taking advantage of all the opportunities in the city and running around like a crazy person, and it had some health effects. And so for me, kind of like Rachel, I guess we could say it was kind of this kind of blessing in disguise, in that it's changed my everyday, changed my lifestyle. I've been able to refocus more on my business, to have more time where I'm not spending, 30 minutes on a bus here, 30 minutes on a bus there in the city, like running to catch an Uber, like to get on the metro in San Francisco. So Rachel, I don't know if you feel like sometimes maybe I feel a little guilty sometimes for the fact that I'm actually kind of appreciative of this change of pace and change of life. I know it's come, of course, with the unfortunate also side of the coin, where this has meant it's been a lot of despair and destruction and just a lot of just tragedy for so many people around this world. But there also, I think, are a few silver linings. So sometimes I feel a little bit guilty about being honest about that. But I think it's also good just to kind of celebrate the good things. So kind of this mixed way of thinking about this situation.
Well, and I think Lindsay hit it on the head, because I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast on my walk this morning, and it was talking about you have everything you need. And if you're feeling frustration, totally paraphrase, I'll have to get it for the show notes, but if you're feeling frustrated, it's because you have too many distractions. Like if you feel overwhelmed and distracted and not moving forward, and pandemic has kind of simplified that for us. And I've even taken the approach of simplifying even more, because I'm dealing with, life trauma plus also health issues plus pandemic. And so it actually is kind of nice, because, it's funny, even Lindsay in the introduction for me is you've seen her everywhere. Well, I've had for how many years felt like that's what I had to do. I had to be everywhere. I had to be doing everything. But look at that. I'm actually seeing a better trajectory by simplifying and focusing. So yeah, and I hear you, like feeling a little guilty, saying, and then hearing Lindsay say she's not having a good year, it kicks me in the gut. But at the same time, I think just having a space to be vulnerable and surrounding yourself with the people, and even within your own mind, identifying, I have this emotion, it's temporary, either I'm frustrated or I'm excited, and getting back to really the core of what's important. It sounds so cliche, but my word for the year has been appreciation. I've really learned appreciation, but to get to that, I had to simplify in the process.
Lauren, I saw you were like eyebrows up to a lot of it.
Yeah.
Y'all, this speaks to me at my core. It really does. That the lack of commute, the lack of extra things, even for us, it was after school activities, because we're right in the middle of all that with the littles. And now we have all the time here, and y'all, we have game night. We have pizza Fridays. Like, we have the stuff that matters. And because that portion of my life we've got it on lock, we've got our family time. Everything else seems to have fallen into place. It's been really easy to say no to the extra stuff that it's just not important to me. And that's okay to say no. And so while Hope Design may have not grown financially leaps and bounds this year, Rachel was talking about how people getting their business on lock and getting everything under control. For me, it's inventory. We have double counted every single piece here, every bead, every little thing. And I now have an online digital inventory system. So there's been all sorts of the New Year's resolution kind of refinement, but actually sticking with it this year, because hey, we're home. So there's a lot to be grateful for. And I think that this is kind of that phoenix in the ashes moment of, if the whole world's going to go down burning, I can't wait to see how we all come out of this, because we're going to be incredibly strong and better developed personalities coming out of this.
When I started this podcast, thank you for that, Lauren. When I started this podcast, it was because 6 years ago, I was in a totally different space. I was really in the beginning wave of the military spouse community and entrepreneurship and what that means. Now, that community has a lot of really strong men and women rallying for it. And so I'm so glad for that. When I first started the podcast, I would ask this question to folks. I'm going to kind of come back to it. I want each of you to chime in. Is right, and I want to do it for right now, if a military spouse came up to you at an event, at a whatever, you kind of fizzle out of that as you start to, like, if your spouse is retiring and stuff, you stop going to some of that stuff. But let's just say you're at something and a military spouse comes up to you, a new military spouse, and says, I'm interested in starting I can't find work. That's usually the trigger, right? I can't find work. I have an MBA, I have this, I have, all these certifications, I can't find work. And I'm thinking about starting my own business. Lauren, what piece of advice would you give that individual?
Oh, give yourself grace and absolutely do it, because everything you see from all of your online businesses that you follow looks fabulous, but there's a real human element and an erring side to that. So, for every success I've had, I've probably had 7 or 8 fails or big fails. And it's okay to grow through that. You don't have to publicize your failures unless you want to, but just understand that everyone has gone through that growing process and you are so not alone.
Claire?
Such a great piece of advice, Lauren. Thank you for sharing that. Mine would be to just be bold, not be afraid, and ask others for questions and advice. Just remember that everyone is standing on the shoulders of giants. We're learning from those who have come before in either age or where they are in their businesses or their journeys. And most times, just about every time, people, they really do truly want to help. And I can remember being so timid and being like, should I ask that person? It's been a while since I've spoken to them. And I've realized, heck, at the very least, maybe I'll get a no, or maybe they won't answer. That's really the worst of it. If you kind of push past that and not be afraid to ask questions. People love to help. They really do. And I guess this kind of is somewhat aligned to one other little thing I want to say. I can remember when Lindsay gave a fantastic closing talk at a military spouse convention a few years back, and it was on the topic of competition. And I remember that she said that there is room in the sandbox for everyone to play. So I take that in so many ways. I take that in one way that, there may be other people who do similar things to you, but you do it in a unique way. And also to learn that we can all share together. We can be collaborative, and it doesn't have to be this super competitive space. So I think that might be something else where the self-doubt and the mind gremlins kind of come in. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions, ask for help. Your support network is what it is, and it will grow to be something fantastic. Like, I consider you women, ladies, I can go to you for questions and advice. And also, don't be afraid about there being, too many people in that sandbox. There's enough room for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rachel, new military spouse comes up to you, ask that same question. You can tell that person is a little vulnerable and, just, why do we get that way? We should be like boasting our ideas, but it's just something that, we get. What would be your advice to that person?
Well, I mean, 2 things. What's funny is when you're talking, it takes me back to when I first started entrepreneurship. It was kind of during the time where we didn't have this big freemium model of information on the internet. I mean, we didn't even have Facebook. We were still MySpace in it, right? And I just remember being that military spouse that was like, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And my husband and I were just talking about this the other day about our son's wanting to do a podcast channel, and my husband was kind of a little skeptical. And I was like, but weren't you skeptical when I first started out? And now look, we're seeing dividends in the pandemic. And so I just remember that also trying to have that integration into the military community. And I share that to say that was 15 years ago. Resources, like Lindsay's talking about, there's so many resources out there. So the first tip would be not to get overwhelmed, but to find someone that you identify with that can help you, that you look up to, and that you can model after, not copy, but model after. They may not necessarily get to be a support for you, but at least there's someone you can look at to see who's doing what you want to do. And the other thing is the negativity that you're going to hear, or skepticism rather. You know, a lot of people who are not in this space, especially the military community, they're very much in the mindset of you have to work a 9 to 5 to be a career woman. That's the only way you can do it as a military spouse. And we're living in a time where we can get PCS, and we're basically PCS proof in a way. You know, it sucks having to move for the most part, but you can create this online, not saying online business, but at least an online brand and put yourself out there. So yeah, those are going to be my 2 main tips. And those are what I wish that someone had said to me, because I just remember going to FRGs and people not understanding, for those not Army family readiness group. But I remember that other spouses didn't understand. My own family wasn't a big proponent. And now when I'm working like part-time and having my best year ever, and I see all my friends out of work, it's not like I'm like, haha, but I'm like, you know, maybe let's adjust our mind a little bit and be a little bit more supportive, because now I'm providing them support, because now they're coming to me asking how they can do online type stuff. And so, yeah, those are my 2 tips.
Someone asked me this question recently, and I shared that and I don't consider myself as a new business owner, and I've been in this space for a handful of years. And I said that what happens is you go into this and with all the excitement, all the shine and everything, and then you start really blasting the Instagram and the Facebook. By the way, I wish we still had MySpace personally, but I used to love to like update my top 8. But anyway, you know, you start really blasting all the social media stuff because it's you know, at no cost, and so it's something that you can do to market your business. You get your game plan together. You've got your trademark letter. You know, you're really feeling it, right? You are on top of the world. And so what I try to tell folks is like, take that feeling and try to remember that feeling every single day. So 7 years in, I lose that feeling so much because I'm like, oh, I gotta balance my QuickBooks. I gotta like send invoices. I'm like, so what I try to tell folks is like, keep that, whatever that energy and that drive was in the beginning. I wish that we could wake up every single day like that. Now, it's not to say, I'm also glad that I figured some of that stuff out very early on, right? Like, be careful who you work with. That's a big, Lauren, we'd probably do a whole other podcast about that, because yes, Lauren and I are like soul sisters, and we found out like there's just being careful about snakes in the grass, right? So I also need to like, let's turn it around and go, what would you be careful about? You know, now it's even maybe if they didn't just start their business, you know, 6 or 7 years in, what would be that piece of advice or information or a little tidbit that you would tell somebody as just like a heads up? Claire, I'm going to throw this to you first, because I've been like going in a counterclockwise on my screen on Zoom. So Claire, what would you tell somebody who's a, you know, military business owner, whether they're active duty, military spouse, veteran business owner? Heads up.
I think a big thing would be to be careful that you don't let the business creep into every aspect of your life, where it starts to, you know, mean that you're spending less and less time with your loved ones, being able to support whoever, you know, the people at your family, where it really starts to keep you up super late at night or really creep into those early mornings. I think boundaries are something that I am still working on. I to this day, I have a really hard time with that. So my big piece of advice would be to really try to establish those and to really honor them. So that you can protect the things that matter to you. And there was some advice given to me actually by another military spouse a few years ago, and I really like the way she said this. She said, if you think about, you have a bucket and you have you know, some stones you need to fit in that bucket. If you put all the little ones in there, you're not going to have the opportunity or the space to fit the bigger one in. So if you liken that to whatever it is that you are really, you know, that really, really you value so much, maybe let's say it's like your family is that big stone. You put that one in there first, and then you can fit in the other stone that, you know, is like business or maybe hobby, whatever the other things are. Because I think that's something, and I'm still, like I said, working on to this day, like staying up late and like letting that infringe upon personal time and family time. So learn those boundaries early and try to get into a routine, because your business affects your personal life, your personal life affects your business, and you want them to be harmonious as much as possible. Of course, there might be those days where like, oh man, like I got to work on this late, so-and-so, can you take care of the dinner? Or, oh man, I'm not going to get my 8 hours tonight. That's always the thing that like I moan about to my husband. So it's all a give and take, but protect those boundaries. I would tell you to be careful about really trying to establish them early and honoring them. It will do you well.
Rachel, I saw your pen flying on that piece of paper.
Well, so Claire kind of stole mine because that's the very first episode of my podcast, Filling the Rocks First. But to piggyback on that, we hear a lot about, well, if you're presented an opportunity in the beginning, you have to pay your dues, you have to take all the opportunities you can. And the other side of that is, and we see this on Pinterest and Instagram, no is a complete sentence, yada, yada. I take more of the middle approach of not right now, because just because that opportunity doesn't fit into my life then, because it doesn't fit into that vase, I have all my other rocks and my sand and everything in there, doesn't mean that I don't necessarily want to have the opportunity in the future. And so for us, like internally, administratively, we'll go through, because I get tons of pitches, and we'll go through and I'll identify ones that I want to do. But like right now, I have to commit 3 to 4 hours in the morning to get my exercise in, get the kids on for learning from home. And I used to grab all those opportunities and I would be so stressed out that I wasn't effective anywhere. So we take and we have buckets when on our Monday board, and it's yes, go ahead, yes for this month, or no, not right now, follow up in like X amount of months. And that was a good way, as opposed to having to get this fork in the road of yes and no, gave me kind of a middle ground to feel better about closing off that opportunity temporarily.
Rachel, I feel like I needed to hear that today. I'm going to jump in. That was really, I'm sorry I stole what you were going to say, but this was really, really helpful. So I also love, I'm just going to jump in for a moment. I love that you commit, you said 3 to 4 hours in the day to get your exercise, to take care of your family, to do those things. And those are like your non-negotiables. And because you invest time in those, you are better at everything else that you do. So deciding those non-negotiables is important.
I know Lauren's coming out. Let me piggyback on that real quick. I do think also, because I've seen the negative effects of being so rigid with that, it's good to have the boundaries. It's good to put those stones in first, but part of what I've gone through this year negatively was a direct correlation that I was too strict with that sort of stuff. And Claire kind of alluded to this, that some nights you may have to work longer, or some days you just need to not work at all because you need to focus on your partner or your kids or whatever else. And it's not as simple as scheduling. And even in the past on my podcast, or when I speak at conferences, I'm like, oh, schedule everything, do this, and you can be successful. But even then, there still has to be flexibility and fluidity. And I think, honestly, we're probably more equipped to understand that now because of pandemic. So I just caution, though, get the structure. But, go back to that vase like Claire was talking about. You put the big rocks in of what's important, and then you fill the sand of all the other things. Think about the vase. You can shift it around. You may just have to do a little bit finagling. And I think that's really, really important. And military spouses, man, we got this. We're all about flexibility and all that, but really commit to having that mentality, boundaries, but not inflexible.
Hit it, Lauren.
Y'all nailed it. So I have 2, but one of them would have been about the same thing, but phrased as pick your donuts, right? Like pick your 2 or 3.
Like donuts.
Yeah, I want to eat the whole dozen. I was gonna say, now you come on, donut, right? They look glorious, but pick your 2 or 3. And let someone else have the others, because you're going to be sick to your stomach if you pick all 12.
Nice.
Period.
And
so that's my fabulous, given by a military spouse. I've applied it ever since. I had to get up because on the, pick your thing, this is my to-do list, and it's a weekly calendar. And if it doesn't fit on that day's block and it's not going to get crossed off, I have to write it on another day, because I know there's 4 hours of, I'll just call them variables, whether it's laundry or picking somebody up or taking me time and going shopping, whatever it is. This is all I'm getting done today. And it's going to go out 2 weeks, because I have that habit of saying yes. If the calendar's empty, I'm like, look, there's space, fill it up.
Yeah.
It's not always real space though. So this is how I keep myself on track.
Again, it's not always real space. It's created space, right? In our minds.
Absolutely.
I love
I have so many fun projects that I've wanted to do, and I keep putting them off. But I've started time blocking that now because my kids are back in school during pandemic, which is its own level of terrifying. But anywho, the other thing that I would, getting back to the original question, that I would protect and worry about, be cautious about, doing my research, making sure that what you're doing, if it's not unique, what sets you apart, protecting yourself. I'm a client of Rachel's. I love all of her digital contracts. They help a lot. So getting your foundation before you really launch, just kind of knowing what your business needs, doing that research, finding your mentors, that type of thing. So having a real plan before you get into the thick of it, and then holy cow, all the wheels are spinning and you have to go back to square one because you missed a really big step. So
right.
Can I circle around with that with something
Sure.
Lindsay said earlier is, you kind of alluded to getting in, doing opportunities with people who might end up being a snake in the grass. And I really want to encourage that just because people are in the military space doesn't mean they have the best interest at heart. It doesn't mean that they value you. There are some conferences and events that I've spoken at and I have been used and treated horribly. And at the end of the day, I just had to adjust my heart and say, you know what, I still poured into the audience members. I'll still have a return in goodwill from that. But then for the future, I am going to close off that opportunity to facilitate or provide for someone who didn't have the respect and value for myself. And so I think it's easy to see the military spouse or military related stamp and go, oh, we're all on the same page. We all got each other's backs. And that's not true. And so just be vigilant of that. I mean, we see that everywhere in business.
Yeah.
But I think especially it's just easy to fall in that false sense of, oh, we're all in this together. And it's not.
Man.
I'm not naming names, but I'm just saying it happens. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not.
Well, and I think in your business, for those that are listening, if you are thinking about starting a business, do it. I think that's a universal yes on all fronts. Claire, Rachel, and Lauren, and Lindsay, just do it.
Yeah.
Second, find a mentor. Third, understand your boundaries. Four, filling up that funnel with those boulders, what matters, not losing sight of that. Understanding my piece would be sometimes that looks different. Every single day might look a little different. Your big boulder that day might be family, but then the next day after that, it might be your business stuff. So whatever that looks like. But then we're all also, I feel like, those that are listening, you might be sensing this, this negativity or these snakes or these bad business folks that also happens non-military. But I think what happens is if you're military and you go to these events and you start working with, you almost tend to trust them like quicker because you're also Air Force. You're not going to screw me over. Right. Something that somebody said to me a long time ago is just because they wear a uniform doesn't mean that they're a good person. Mm-hmm. And I love that. That was an active duty service member, obviously saying it about another, about in general. And it's unique because we have people who are in this podcast right now who are married to somebody who's no longer active duty. And so, those folks I could probably just ask them to come on and share with me some of your, feedback of being in. And, but, for those that are listening, don't let that discourage you because it can happen in the civilian world, non-military as well. But I think what also happens is we tend to go, oh, you're military too. Okay, cool. You're not going to screw me over. Mm-hmm. And we've all seen that happens too. So just be careful. And also if that does happen, just move on. You've learned from it. Now, like Rachel said, now I won't commit to something by that individual or by that group because it wasn't a good fit for me. And same thing has happened to me, Rachel, because when I speak at events or when I do trainings or when I'm doing something, I take that opportunity so seriously because those people in a room, and Lauren, maybe I've talked to you, and Claire, you certainly know this, those people have chosen to be in the room where I am speaking to them. So I take that shit seriously. That is something that you, especially if there's a number of different options going on at that one time, but you've chosen to sit in the room that I'm facilitating, I take that really seriously because that person's time is important. It's money, right? If you're going to a conference, usually trying to do professional development. So, and if that,
you're their rock.
I just feel like you've chosen to sit here. Let me try and you've got a very limited amount of time for that person. So anyway, I go off on a rant there, but we're all feeling that. And for those that are listening, you're a business owner or you're trying to figure out where to jump in, do it. Know that this community heavily supports you, but also know that in any business, there's going to be snakes. There's just going to just move on from that. Don't try and dwell on it because, you'll just learn from it. Ladies, I feel like we could keep going, but I want to try and wrap this up for those that are listening. Lauren Hope is the owner, designer, and artisan behind Hope Design. And she also has worked on the ShopMilitary Movement. So Lauren, how do folks connect with you? What's your preferred way of connection?
HopeDesignLTD.com or shopmilitary.org.
Great. And Rachel, I'm reading yours. So she is a business consultant. She has an MBA, multi-licensed attorney, world requested speaker. She focuses a lot on legal protections of businesses, growing multiple successful businesses. That's a lot to say. Rachel, how do you recommend that folks reach out to you?
You guys can just go to rachelbrenke.com. It's kind of the mothership. It has all the different brands and resources. Rachel Brenke itself has my podcast and stuff for general entrepreneurs, legal business checklist. And then if you fall into one of my other niches, you'll see it on there. You can just click through. We also have a chat box that myself and my team monitor. So if you have any questions, need resources, or just how to get connected, feel free to reach out through that. I love making connections, especially military community. So please don't be shy.
Rachel and Lauren, are you both open to being like informal mentors to maybe a new military spouse who might be interested in starting a job or starting a business?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
How could you say no to that when I teed up like that?
I know.
Yes, you're going to make me
offer
look
you
like
can't
an
refuse.
a-hole, Lindsay, if I say no on a podcast. But no, honestly, I love that kind of stuff. I love the newbies because I get to shape and frame their mind and help them not make the same mistakes that I did.
Right. I say I've made plenty of mistakes. If I can save someone skipping one step in this tumultuous journey, then by all means.
Yep.
I'm going to do my I will never do this justice because Claire has so many accolades that she doesn't list it on her website, but she works with these huge organizations. And I'm sure she is red from blushing about this now. She never does that. But Claire's a nutritionist, personal trainer. She does a lot of virtual coaching. So I know she has a program right now where you can actually sign up and do her workouts all online with her. That's really great. There's no excuses. Big fan right here. Claire, any last remarks for this podcast episode?
I want to thank you both, Lauren and Rachel, for coming and speaking so candidly about how you're doing, really, and being honest, sharing the successes, being honest about the different challenges, and really creating a space that is welcoming and honest, and also inspirational. Like I still feel, Lauren, I'm going to use your last name. I feel hopeful about all the things that can happen. We're stronger together, and this is really a beautiful opportunity to come and to talk and have this roundtable discussion. So we want to thank you both from the bottom of our hearts for coming, and to Lindsay for being our, the mastermind behind it all, and welcoming me on for this season. So it's an honor. I want to thank you all for your time.
And for those that are listening, Claire's best on Instagram, Florida Lee Fitness. She's probably, that thing, Instagram is like attached to her hip. So if you're wanting to connect with Claire, please do so. She's a wonderful resource. In the show notes, I'll include all the things. Ladies, thank you so much. I'm wishing you all the love and success for rest of 2020 into 2021. I cannot wait to see your businesses continue to grow and to be successful. You two are folks that I now can call in my network, and I always want you to know that if there's anything that anybody can do in my network is, my family is your family. So thank you guys so much for listening to the Drop and Give Me 20 podcast. Do go back to some of the other episodes, even season 1, because you'll see the tone of season 1 is completely different from season 5 now. And thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Drop and Give Me 20. Drop and Give Me 20 is brought to you by Germono Advertising Company, and we would love to invite you into our network of military entrepreneurs on Facebook. Just search for Drop and Give Me 20 and join the Facebook group.